From somewhere in southern Rhode Island, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show starring your host, Nolan Carr, inviting you to join us and our guest this week, the illustrious Russ Banham. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition here with Nolan Carr Night Show, here with yours truly, Nolan Carr. As always, if you've enjoyed episodes such as this one, do us a favor by subscribing on YouTube, following us on the audio platforms, clicking that thumbs up and like button, all that fun jazz to continue to grow the podcast, all that fun stuff. So down the road, when my guest this week wins or is nominated for another Pulitzer Prize, you say, holy shit, he was on that podcast with Nolan Carr all those years ago. I better have subscribed to that podcast then. But nevertheless, onto the pomp and circumstance. From his humble beginnings on Long Island, immersing himself in the beach bum culture by day at Jones Beach, and being an astute businessman by night, selling hot dogs and beer at Shea Stadium, my guest this week has been there and done that, and even been lucky enough by his peers to be known as America's corporate historian by prestigious organizations like Leaders Edge magazine. And he's not working with comedic giants such as Norman Lear, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and Ivan Reitman. When Russ Banham isn't telling kids that their frog is dead and to only call him by his last name, you can find him at the forefront of business and world news through his written work for the last several decades. It's an honor and pleasure to have him on as our guest this week, Mr. Banham. How are you this week?
Doing well, hanging in there. We just dodged I should say dodged. That's probably the wrong word there, but we because it's not over yet. We were
Yeah,
evacuated last Wednesday, so I guess that's what today's Tuesday. Yeah, because of the Eaton fire.
yeah,
It was horrific. Spent 4 days 50 miles south in a hotel with the pets, uh, and even last night there was. Potential for another evacuation, and we had to play, had to pack again and play close watch to this app we have alerting
yeah.
us. So it's been tough. Yeah, you caught me at a difficult time. I actually, like a week and a half ago, I looked 20 years younger than I look right now.
Well, you're only 40, right?
40, yeah. You maybe add another 30
Yeah.
to that.
Well, it gives you good perspective then on what quality of life is like and what to count your blessings on.
Thank you. Yeah. Um, Yeah, it really does. It makes you think through how close we were to losing our home. I mean, we're only 4 miles due west of Altadena, that middle class neighborhood that was virtually destroyed by the Eaton fire. And to think that easily could have been us. We're in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. Moved here 2.5 years ago after I guess 10 years in Los Feliz in Los Angeles. But really, really no place seems to be safe
Yeah,
because the fact that embers can float on a gust of wind
sure.
for miles. And but it was something. 5 a.m. last Wednesday morning. When the alarms start going off and the apps goes, go, go, go.
Yeah,
We had packed the night before, and just to get the pets in the car, and my wife's in her car, and you can't go west because that's the Palisades fire. We couldn't go east because it was the Eaton fire. So, and then the mountains are, north of us. So all we did was just drive south,
sure.
kept driving and kept driving until the skies cleared, and we found a hotel that took the pets, and it's packed with evacuees by the middle of the day with their pets. It was just an unimaginable tragedy and an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Not that I have any.
Well, hopefully this it's gets solved first because it really should. So no one's life gets spared anymore. On another note, I'd like to go back in time in the time machine to talk about little Russ Benham's life back in on Long Island and sort of set the stage for me beyond Jones Beach of what your life was
Yeah,
like as a kid before you got into a life of storytelling and conveying these great things.
sure. Actually, it's not Long Island, it's Queens. Yeah, I was born in 1954 in Manhattan, and then just that the hospital was in Manhattan, and we lived in the Bronx for 2 years. I have no recollection of that, but we moved to Queens. My dad's a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, artist and musician, and we lived in a dead end street, what we call attached houses, kind of like row houses, and it was great. My childhood and my boyhood was just amazing because all of these vets, they came back and they started families. I'm a baby boomer. That was the baby boom. And there must have been 25 kids between, the ages of, 5 and 15 when I was 5. And we all played on the block and probably the best time of my life. And it's funny because, I just got Social Security when I turned 70. And when I met with the administrator at the Social Security office, she said, you've been working since you were 12. And I had a paper route for 2 years. And I was astonished that,
Yeah,
I mean, they would pay us in cash and change in a
yeah.
little glassine envelope that they'd give us. But I was astonished that they actually paid Social Security taxes. So
Mm.
I'd been working for 58 years. And then when I was 14, I think you mentioned that earlier, I I had a friend from seventh grade, eighth grade, and he knew someone who knew someone who could get us jobs at Shea Stadium as vendors. And so we showed up, and you actually, it's a union. I mean, we're kids, 14 years old. You had to join the union. And I tell people this, I don't know if you're familiar with the film On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando.
Sure.
These are longshoremen, dock workers, and they have to show up in the morning and they stand there, and then the union heads come out and okay, you work, you can work, you can work. And so I figured out uh, that I had to sort of make myself look like what I expected they thought a vendor should look like, and to get picked. And the first couple times I didn't get picked, and finally they picked me. I got myself up to the front of the line, and and then I realized the only way that they were going to continue to pick me is if I sold more soda, hot dogs, pizza, whatever it was, than any other vendor. And I did just that. I pretty quickly became the number one vendor
There you go.
at Shea Stadium, and I kept that for many years. Um, I could catch coins pretty well, and I could throw hot dogs pretty well. It was in a little envelope, a little clear plastic envelope thing. You'd throw it, and I was a cross country runner in
Okay.
high school, so I was able to run up the ramps at Shea Stadium where the New York Mets played. Yeah, and I was a hustler.
April of 2024, you were on another podcast similar to this, where I think it was just audio, and you talked about your transition from Meatballs and acting to then your literary career.
Yeah,
And you told a story of how you got the gig as Crockett in Meatballs, where you're just getting to the beach with your sister. Of course, you're driving with no shoes on. You check your answering machine and you see,
yeah,
oh, your agent says, hey, there's a gig for you, you should take it. I'm curious on how close you were because you just got to the beach, I'm guessing. How close were you to saying, screw that, I'm not taking that, I'm just going to stay at the beach because I just got here, rather than actually getting up and going to it? Was there a close decision of saying no and not taking it, or were you interested in
yeah.
taking it, whether you were told about it or not?
I would only say no if I didn't think it was absolutely possible for me to drive from Jones Beach into Manhattan proper.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would never, ever turn down an audition or ever tell an agent. And at that time, those were my agents in New York, but I had one in California as well. That no, I'm not gonna show up. I remember it because you mind if I tell you the story
Yeah,
again?
go for it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, by that point in my career, I'd done a number of off Broadway plays. I was discovered by an agent, and then did some off Broadway, and then Broadway, and then um, Universal Pictures offered me a contract as a studio player, 7 year kind of thing, and that got the attention of an LA agent, and he advised my New York agents to not sign it, and he said. And they said, well, that's, crazy. Why wouldn't he do this? I look back and think I probably might still be an actor today. I don't know how I'd feel about that had I signed it. But he promised, he says, I'll get him in a film by the end of the summer, something like that. And so Meatballs, which was then called Summer Movie, no, sorry, Summer Camp. That was the working title for it. My agent calls my answering service, and as I did often throughout the day, I called into the service, and they said, "Call your agent." So I called Peggy Hadley in New York, and she said, "Yeah, it's a group of a Canadian producer, turned out to be Ivan Reitman, and he's going to direct it. Another fellow named Danny Goldberg, who became my lifelong friend. He wrote it with Harold Ramis and Len Bloom, and he's going to produce it. Blah blah blah. Anyway, so I am. I'm at the beach in those cutoff jeans, barefoot, no shirt, and I said to Peggy, "I'll do my damnedest to get to Manhattan." And I said to my sister Susan, "Come on." She was probably 13, 12 at the time. And we jumped in the car and we drove into Manhattan. And I parked out, which you don't do in Manhattan. I parked outside and I said to my sister, "Stay in the car, and I'll be right down." And I went up in an elevator and people are looking at me. And then I walk into the lobby, I guess, where the audition was being held, or this room where the audition was being held. All the actors were in there. And these were guys I auditioned against all the
Sure.
time. We knew each other by name. And they're looking at me and they're thinking, he's a genius. Why didn't I think of that? He looks just like someone, he looks like a camp counselor, which was the role. And I went in, and Ivan Reitman was there, met him, and Danny Goldberg, uh, and uh, and I auditioned, and they thought it was brilliant. But I told them the truth, where I was, the beach, and I don't know, and I was just in a certain mood,
Yeah,
kind of a jubilant kind of mood that I made it into Manhattan, that my fellow actors there were, giving me the fisheye, and it filtered into my audition, and they called me
sure.
back the next day to be filmed with Sarah Torgoff, who played my love interest in Meatballs, and we had some chemistry, and that was it.
How much though of, I mean, there has to be some level. I mean, obviously dressing or appearing like that takes them back and they says, "Oh, that's different. That's not usual compared to the other people we've auditioned." But compared to that though, there has to be some also level of your ability as an actor present in that audition from them say, "That's our guy. That's who we want to play Crockett." Or was it mainly you're coming in looking different than the rest of the cast or the rest of the group auditioning?
I think I had, I don't know what it is today. I had something about me that made me interesting at that time. I remember the other agent in New York, Jeff Zeiner. He described me once as a street as a an intelligent street kid,
There you go.
and and I had curly hair. I wasn't unattractive, but I wasn't handsome in a classical sense. I guess I was cute, if maybe. I don't know. I mean, people liked me. Um, I had confidence.
Yeah.
Definitely had that, and frankly, I think confidence has been how I've been able to transport myself throughout my life, from one career to another successively.
For
Just
that movie, obviously there's a script that you're following and you're reading and making sure you're hitting your lines, but I'm sure also to an extent Ivan gave you the ability to ad lib
right.
or go off script a little bit. Also, I'm sure Bill got first billing with that degree, seeing as he's sort of the star of the movie. For you though, as an actor, how much of a crutch or non-crutch is going off script and be doing more of that rather than sticking completely to the script back then in your career?
Well, I had already worked in two films for Woody Allen, so I was comfortable improvising. In Annie Hall, if you recall the actor Tony Roberts, I don't remember the character he played, but he was always Woody Allen's best friend.
Okay.
Not always, they did several films together. I played him as a teenager, and then Alfred Lutter played Woody as a teenager, and we had three scenes, and they were all cut. But I got to work with Woody on that, and then interiors, and he never gave any of the actors, including the stars, the full script. He would
Okay.
give what we call in the business the sides. So these would just be a couple pages, and he would have you read them. I kid you not, the moment before the cameras would roll, and you'd read them, and then he'd say, "Feel free to improvise," and that's what we did. We improvised. So I was used to that, and then also, training as an actor at the HB Studios in Manhattan, and Neighborhood Playhouse were the two that I went to. Um, you learn improvisation. And then in college, I went to St. John's University. I was a theater major, so we did a lot of improv
Yeah.
in those classes too. So yeah, it wasn't a challenge, and I enjoyed doing it. I had no fear doing it. It's not like improv in the context of uh, the Groundlings, for
Sure.
example, where you have the pressure to be funny. You knew the circumstances of the scene. You knew your obstacles. You knew your objectives, I should say first, and then your obstacles. But much of acting is just listening
Sure.
and responding in the moment. Uh, and I guess I was pretty good at that.
There were, as you well know, you're the person who's playing Crockett. You have
Yeah.
some classic film lines that probably set, I don't say set the stage, that's not the same thing, but hold weight all these years, 45 years later. Obviously, there's Don't Call Me Bobby, telling that 6-year-old that his frog's dead, giving Torgov the line Lance Cashman as a total jerk off, and of course, she likes me, she likes me. I know that those are sort of improv moments lines that you made up, but how much of those were spur of the moments then in that moment compared to thinking, okay, what can I say in this next scene, or how do you describe that element?
Boy, that's a hard one because it is 45 years ago.
Yeah,
I gosh, I don't I know the script
yeah,
was really well written. And But there was definitely room for us to, by that point we knew our characters.
yeah,
My character was essentially formed via the relationship with Todd Hoffman, who played Wheels. Much of this, many of the scenes that Todd and I did together, we were the hijinks guys. Those ended up on the cutting room floor. We basically would go on these stealth missions, Todd and I, and to make trouble for the other camp, whatever their name was. I can't remember.
Mohawk,
The Mohawks. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, and we did things like we would their bus. I remember one scene where we kind of put sugar in the gas tank. I mean, it was naughty stuff that we
yeah,
did. That whole arc essentially ended up on the cutting room floor.
uh,
So when Meatballs was shot, and the first, and I'm so used to being an author now, the first draft, I'm going to say, the
yeah,
original film itself was done. I was already out here in California doing the Norman Lear sitcom, and Todd said to me he knew that they were showing the film to distributors. And he knew the projectionist, and he said, "Come with me. We'll sneak in. We'll go upstairs and we'll watch the film." So Todd and I got to see all of our scenes in the original cut. That's what I was looking for, that word, of the film. That film was not good. A single distributor was interested in picking up Meatballs. There was this kind of, I don't remember the position he had at Paramount at the time, but Jeff Katzenberg,
yeah.
who became one of the great producers in Hollywood. He saw something in that film that was salvageable, and I'm getting this all secondhand. But a parent, and Danny mentioned this to me. We had a standing lunch for many years. He passed away a year and a half ago. Just a terrible tragedy. And he anyway, Jeff prevailed upon Ivan, Danny, and the rest of the producing team to enlarged the scenes between Bill and Chris Makepeace, who played Rudy.
Yeah.
He felt that that was the heart and soul of the movie, and so Bill and Chris Makepeace went back to Toronto in a studio, and they built some scenery, and they shot probably three or four scenes that are in the film,
Okay.
and they were really some of the better scenes in the film. Chris was a terrific young actor, and and then my scenes with Todd were sacrificed. And I'm so glad they were, because
Yeah.
the movie then became what it is. The other great thing that they did was they got rid of the original music and they hired Elmer Bernstein.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the top film composers of all time, frankly. And his score for the film, I think, is what gives it its emotional weight. I'm sure you would
Yeah.
agree. I After my acting career fell apart, I didn't watch Meatballs
Huh.
for, I'm going to say, 30 years.
Wow.
And by that point, I was a successful stage director in
Yeah.
Seattle, also writing books. And there was a fundraiser for the Shakespeare Company, Seattle Shakespeare, and I was the MC for the fundraiser. And one of the I said that I would cook. I'm half Italian. I would cook macaroni and meatballs and screen the movie Meatballs for someone who would donate $5,000, and someone did, and that was the first time I watched the film since I
Wow.
was a young man, and it was great to see it
Yeah.
because I really felt that it was a worthwhile effort, that it captured what it was like for a kid to go
Yeah.
off to summer camp for the summer and have all that fear of being away from family and friends, and just like a projectile shot into this environment
Yeah.
where you don't know anyone. And then by the end of the film, it's just the opposite. They don't want to leave. They've made
Yeah.
some of the best friends of their lives, and they have some of the best memories ever. And Elmer's music, I think, transports the
Sure.
viewer throughout that trajectory.
During that film and after the film came out, or maybe even still throughout, you became friends with Bill Murray, and you ended up hanging out with a little known group. You might have heard of them. People might have heard of them, called the Rolling Stones. I don't know if they're still around today. Um, Being friends with him through working on Meatballs and then after Meatballs, what is it like to hang around with somebody like that who's held in such a high standard even to this day?
Well, when Bill did Meatballs, we didn't know who he was. I mean, we
Sure.
knew that he had just finished, I guess, his first season on SNL, replacing Chevy Chase. Didn't know at the time he was one of the writers with his brother Brian, and so there was no sense when he came on the set of Meatballs that he was this big star. He just seemed like someone else in the film. But it was quite apparent instantly when we watched him or acted with him that he was something special, that he really had this comedic talent that was so unique. Uh,
Sure.
in many ways, we just saw him. It's so funny. Just 2 nights ago, our youngest daughter had never seen What About Bob, Bill and Richard Dreyfuss.
All
And
right.
he's so good in that
Yeah.
film. So many other films, his dramatic films later on. But my wife and I said, having just seen Elf, there's there's some sense that Will Ferrell um, maybe paid homage to
Yeah.
Bill in terms of the character that I never noticed before. But anyway, yeah. So we, during the film, I became friendly with Bill, and a couple of the other actors did. Matt Craven did. We played basketball together. Matter of fact, I almost didn't finish Meatballs because I went up for a layup. I was a good basketball player.
Yeah.
Bill, just fun. He's a physical guy, and he pushed my hip as I was in the air, and I landed
Uh,
wrong on my ankle. And Danny told me, decades later, we actually had a meeting about replacing you. We didn't think I'd be able to finish the film. But after the film wrapped, uh, Bill and I were the only ones who lived in New York. So we got together for lunch a couple times right after the film wrapped. And he said to me, oh, and Matt Craven was visiting in New York. My family put him up at that time. And Bill said, hey, and we went out to lunch, the three of us. And Bill said that we're going to do the first episode of SNL. And the Stones not only are the hosts, not only are the musical guests, they're the hosts too. So they're going to be in a bunch of scenes. Why don't you guys come down, just hang out, at what is it, Studio 8H, and you get the, free concert for a week.
yeah.
We did that. And during the course of sitting there, and the Stones were amazing rehearsal. Not so great for that. The two SNL, they shoot it twice. They do a dress
Yeah.
rehearsal with an audience, and then the actual one. The dress rehearsal was great, but not. I don't know. Not so great during the actual one. I mean, I still loved it, but I've read
Yeah.
that people were critical of it. And Danny Aykroyd came to me at one point, and he said, you guys are hanging out. We could use you in some scenes. You make a buck. And so we said, sure. So Matt and I ended up in three scenes. Uh, Funny because my daughter's boyfriend was able to find the
Oh,
episode
wow.
and sent me one of them. I've got it right here on my screen. I call it the Rolling Stones. And in this one particular scene that I did. But we were background players
There you
for
go.
that. But there's one where, there I am with the
Who was the best actor of the Rolling Stones who were in the group at that point?
oh, Mick. Yeah. It was very well, and he was an actor. I mean, he's
Yeah.
an actor, been in films and all. Yeah, it was pretty great. I was they were drinking from a bottle of Jack Daniels during the rehearsals the whole time. So it was just so, when I was that age, just so cool to be
Yeah.
hanging out with the Rolling Stones and they're drinking and everyone's smoking weed. You could smell weed everywhere, and uh, those were those days.
I can see this and listening to interviews of actors saying this, but acting is I'm sure, a cutthroat business where one day you're at the top of the mountain and the next moment you're down below in the stream. And you sort of had that experience where you're in Meatballs with these actors, it becomes good, and then there's working with Norman Lear on his show, and it doesn't do too well, and now you're out of luck with that stuff. Experiencing that moment where it changes dramatically,
Yeah.
how much did that make you jaded at that age of wanting to act going forward or not wanting to act going forward?
It was one of the low points of my life, I would say. Uh, I didn't understand it. Now, mind you, I'm still this cocky young kid from Queens, New York, and in my mind, I had thought, okay, I had gone up the ladder that one needed to climb as an actor from off Broadway, and now I'm in this sitcom as a regular weekly in this sitcom, and the pilot did well, and they picked up 6 episodes, and that did well, and they picked up another 6, and we ended up against Love Boat, which was
Okay.
a big hit at that time, and it was canceled. Uh, and I just thought that I would instantly be cast in something else. And I continue to have auditions, but I look back now and I realize that my confidence that I had had up until that point, there was a chink in my armor,
Okay.
and somehow it changed who I was as a person. It changed me physically too. I started to get a little older. I no longer was that cute street kid with smarts. I had to wear. I got glasses. I needed glasses. My curly hair that I wore kind of big, that no longer was in vogue, and people were were wearing mullets. I was not a mullet guy. I guess I exited that person who I was that had some appeal as an actor, and so much of show business is typecasting
Sure.
that I didn't know who I was anymore, and that made it tough for the agents to find me roles that I was right for. So it was like falling into a sinking pit,
Sure.
a quicksand, and I kept at it for about another year and a half. My agents in New York said, "Come back to New York. You started as a theater actor. We'll get you back in theater." I only had one offer. It was to understudy John Hurd, playing the role of the gentleman caller in A Glass Menagerie on Broadway. But my agent said, "No, yeah, you don't want to be an understudy," because I had developed a name for myself. So I couldn't get anywhere. I
Sure.
got screen tests for soap operas where it was between myself and maybe three other actors, and I just didn't get them. And then my marriage fell apart. Uh, I was just at a really low point. I was nobody you'd want to live with. Uh, my wife left me, and that was definitely the right thing to happen. And so I, who got me out of that pit was an actor I worked with who became a very dear friend from that point forward and, until his passing. His real name was Phil Zinkevich, and he was an actor. As an actor, he was Phil Carroll. He and I collaborated on a screenplay at one point, and he had been a business journalist. And he said to me, "You're a good writer, Russ." And I knew I was a good writer. I'd been
Sure.
told that by the nuns at St. Mary's who taught me. I was in elementary school. And I originally wanted to be a playwright or a writer of some sort. And he said, "I think I can get you some work at it was a daily business newspaper, 170 years old, called the Journal of Commerce. I can get you work on spec," which meant that I would write an article, and if they wanted to publish it, I would get paid $100. And if they didn't publish it, I'd get paid nothing. Uh, and he says, "And don't worry." I said, I said, Phil, I don't know anything about business. I've never written as a journalist. Uh, so I mean, I never studied journalism.
Yeah.
He says, "Don't worry, I can teach you both." And so he mentored me, and my first article sold, and then my second one sold, and so after my marriage collapsed, my Phil said to me, "I'll get you more work," and it was keeping me afloat. And then at one point, an opportunity arose for me to join the staff of that newspaper, covering in the insurance industry. That was my reporting beat. So they hired me as a newspaper reporter, and I endured imposter syndrome because I was surrounded by bona fide journalists who'd gone
Sure.
to, and I kid you not, Harvard, Yale, Columbia School of Journalism. Uh, they were truly expert journalists. I remember one in particular, Mark Monnier, was I loved reading his articles, and I thought, God, I'm awful. I don't know this. But I still had something in me that said, going back to when I was a vendor, I'm going to do this the best that I can.
Yeah.
I'm everything I possibly have. I'm going to learn everything there is to know about insurance, which is not easy. Frankly,
Sure.
it was probably the toughest reporting beat there because it's such an esoteric sort of industry to understand. And this isn't, homeowners insurance or your
Yeah.
car. This is the insurance policies that businesses purchase. And there were so many aspects to it I needed to learn. and I worked hard to learn those aspects. And anyway, I got better at it. And the editor of the newspaper at the time, Stan Erickson, I don't know, he saw something in me that I myself didn't see. And one day he came to me and he said, we've got a lot of really good journalists at this newspaper, but you have an ability to tell a story
Hmm.
because of your background in the theater. And I didn't believe him, but he kept at it. To this day, he he's going to get a little emotional. He believed in me. So, yeah,
That's the greatest gift someone can give you if at least one person believes in you in some aspects that can help you soar. Speaking of the Commerce Journal, and apologies if that's not, if I'm saying incorrectly the name of the place, but at some point in
here we go.
that, oh, there you go, Jack Bauer.
There we go.
At
Now it doesn't look like I'm cheering up.
Hey, it
All
doesn't
right.
matter if you're terrible. It means you care about you doing that means a lot to you. So props to you. At the Commerce Journal at some point in the 80s before you left, you were
Journal of
nominated
Commerce. Yeah.
Journal of Commerce at some point before you left.
Sorry. Yeah.
No worries. At some point in the late 80s when you left that
Yeah.
group, you were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize award for I believe
I was
the
still
st
there when I was nominated. Yeah.
the story of the Soviet Union possibly bugging the office walls of the US embassy in Moscow.
Right.
That's correct. At that point, you had relatively just started them within a few years span,
Yeah.
nominating for that award for writing in journalism and how much that holds. You
Yeah.
t just talked about confidence. How much confidence that give you to continue to soar upwards in the field of journalism?
Well, again, it was Stan who realized that this was an opportunity. First of all, he put it on page one, and it was the lead story, several stories that I wrote. The backdrop to that, real quickly, is Melvin Laird, who was my deep throat. I can say that now because he's passed on. He knew the Eric Ritter, and I don't know if you're familiar with the journalism, but there was the Knight Ritter newspaper chain was the largest in the country at the time, and the Journal of Commerce was the flagship newspaper of the Ritter part when it merged with the Knight part. But the Miami Herald, Philadelphia Inquirer, Detroit Free Press, those were all the newspapers in that chain of newspapers. Anyway, Melvin visited Eric for lunch one day. Stan grabbed me, says, I want you to come in. And Eric said, listen, kid, this you're reading these stories about the embassy being bugged. That's not the case. I said, really? He says, yeah. He said, but I can't go on record for any of this. But you can nail down this story, and the way to do it is through a secret insurance policy that the U.S. government purchased to cover the building of our embassy in Moscow. And I'm not going to go into it because it's a labyrinth story.
Sure.
And some of the articles are available online. But anyway, I started reporting this story. I was able to go through the Freedom of Information Act, get a hold of the insurance policy. It was heavily redacted, but there was enough in there for me to make my assertions. And I did have my deep throat, whom a former State Department official, et cetera, something like actually a Defense Department official, because he was Secretary of Defense. And yeah, and I pieced it together. There was death threats. I got on my answering machine at the newspaper, and but I kept it up, and yeah, I was nominated. And Stan says, as the editor in chief, I was one of the finalists that year, and so that lifted me in such a way that I felt I could leave the newspaper and become a freelance
Sure.
journalist, business journalist. Yeah, so there was that, and at the same time, I wanted to leave New York. Uh, I still had this interest in the theater, And I did have an MA and an MFA in playwriting and directing. And so I thought we could move to Seattle, and I might be able to get some. I was remarried at this point. My wife, an actor, so we both moved to Seattle, and we were very successful in Seattle. She worked nonstop as an actor, all the big theaters there, Seattle Rep, ACT, and I began directing at many theaters in Seattle, all equity plays, and then writing freelance journalism on the side for The Economist, Financial Times, Forbes, many different business, Wall Street Journal, and then began writing histories of companies. That and in and of itself it was completely serendipitous. I got a call from this publisher uh, more than 25 years ago. I happened to be in New York visiting my parents at the time, and he said, "Hey, I have a 100-year-old insurance company. They want to have a history written of the company. I understand you're the top reporter covering this particular industry. Can you write a book?" And I guess I had the chutzpah to some of my confidence had returned, and I said, "Of course." And I knew I could write a book.
Yeah,
And I did. I wrote that book, and then wrote another book, A History of a Bank. And that same publisher, I had an opportunity to do with the history of Coors, the Coors family, a multi-generational. They were still the owners of Coors at that time, and the grandson of the founder of Coors, might have been great grandson. I can't remember. I think it was the grandson. Uh, he uh, he read the insurance book, and he said, if this kid, because I'm still pretty young, if this kid can make insurance sound interesting, imagine what he'll do with beer."
yeah,
And, so I wrote that book, and it became a regional bestseller. And then the my fifth book was The History of Ford, and that became an international bestseller. More than 750,000 copies were sold, and I think in many respects it sold that well. It was a beautiful book. A different publisher did that book, and Paul Newman, a race car driver,
yeah,
he drove a lot of, I mean, a legitimate, bona fide.
sure, yeah,
He drove a lot of Ford Shelbys and Formula One cars. The Ford family knew Paul really, Paul, like we're buddies, really well, and so he wrote a 600-word foreword to that book, like a prologue
yeah,
to the book, and I wrote 60,000 words. It said by Russ Banham, forward by Paul Newman, and our names were the same
yeah.
size. So if I ever had any hopes as a young actor that I would share billing with Paul Newman,
There you
uh,
go.
came true on a book. And then I was off and running. And I'm right now I'm involved in writing my 34th book. I've written the histories of Boeing, that sold, also a bestseller, really well, called Hire. Harvard Business School, as I made a name for myself writing about all facets of business,
Sure.
move well beyond just insurance to write about everything in business. Really got to know business and love, still love it to this day. I'm still curious about everything there is to do with business. I know a lot about geopolitics and economics, macroeconomics. Harvard Business School asked me to write their 100-year history, and I did that with their professor emeritus, Howard Stevenson. I've written biographies of billionaires who started with nothing, just an idea, and those have done pretty well. And right now, I'm writing the history of a 150-year-old law firm, which is great to go back
Yeah.
150 years and chart that company's history, or that firm's history.
I want to read a few things to you, and it speaks to the quality of your work. Rocky Mountain Legend rose to number 7 on the Denver Post regional bestseller list, being dubbed by Leader's Edge magazine as America's corporate historian. January magazine saying the Ford Century was a masterpiece in automotive automotive writing, and Aviation Week heralded Wanderlust as masterfully capturing the broad history and spirit of the company as it evolved over the decades. Assuming that all those descriptive adjectives will make one feel nice from your perspective, what does it say about you, about wanting to tell the story the quote unquote correct way in your words?
I think the kind of history writing I do is certainly factual. It's warts and all, because because every organization endures setbacks. I mean, it's business. So few companies survive 100 years, and I mean
Sure.
across industry sectors, financial services, manufacturing, retail, whatever it might be. Those setbacks are important, because it provides some tension for the reader. Yet they know that the organization is going to surmount whatever obstacles obstructed the way. So and in many respects, the books that I write are celebratory, because of the fact that the organization has lasted as long as it has. So I think all historians and all biographers seek to present, as much truth as they can get their hands on about about the organization or the individual they're writing about, but with an eye towards making it a good read. Uh, uh, so yeah, so I think that's the work that I kind of do. I don't know if I'm answering your question
I don't
on.
know. Yeah, that does, because obviously you want to tell the story the right way. A few years ago, you were at George Mason University's 50th anniversary, whether it be for the school or the thing, because you wrote a certain book about that area. Excuse me.
The Fight for Fairfax. I actually
Th
did two editions over a 12-year period.
that book, then, does being part of that type of momentous occasion, does that book sit in the upper echelon of some of your more prized work from your own perspective?
It's to me, it's my favorite book, only because I never worked harder. I was entrusted to write the history of all of Northern Virginia, from the end of World War II to the almost the present time. I never interviewed more people for a book than I did for that project. I interviewed governors, congress people. I interviewed presidents of universities. I interviewed the people who uh, wanted to see Northern Virginia become this bedroom community to Washington, D.C., and then early on, right after the war, and then those who saw the promise for that region to become a major technological hub. The first book came out, I guess, maybe 13, 14 years ago. And at the end of it, I dubbed Northern Virginia, I went out on a limb, the Silicon Valley of the East. And then some 11, 12 years later, George Mason University and the University of Virginia, because they combined to publish the book. That's who published the book. They reached out to me and said, you said this, 11, 12 years ago, and now Amazon has selected Northern Virginia, Arlington, as their second headquarters in the
Hmm.
United States. We want you to write a second edition, and that second edition, I think, is my favorite book, because I didn't just tack on another 11 years. I rewrote the entire book. I had access to research that I didn't have the first time around, because so much more had been digitized.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do the same amount of physical research, going into archives as I did the first go round. That was now, instantly accessible to me. And so I'm proudest of that book. And I did a chapter in the book on the founding of George Mason University, which is an incredible success story in and of itself. An incredibly diverse student body, that over that 12-year period. When I went there, I guess I think it was 2 years ago, when I was asked to be the keynote
Yeah.
speaker, 50th anniversary. And I felt that was a great honor for me. I think, it's online, it's on YouTube. You can see
Yeah.
the things. Yeah, I just, yeah, that's my,
That's your.
hey, that's the capstone in many respects of my career as a business historian.
You talked about quickly for a few seconds about what you're working on now, and I'll ask about that later briefly.
Yeah.
But is there something, and I know you've written thousands of articles and several
Good.
dozen books. For
Yeah.
you, is there something that you haven't written? I'm sure there is, that you're like, huh, that'd be interesting to write about either an article or book form.
My kids insist that I someday write my memoir, but I'm uncomfortable writing about myself. I'd rather do a podcast with you
Yeah,
and with others. Uh, no, I think I'm just going to keep plugging away and see
sure.
what comes my way. So much of my life has been serendipitous when it comes to people like my friend Phil, who said, "Hey, you're a good writer. I can get you work as a business journalist." Or Stan at the Journal of Commerce. You're a really good storyteller. And then Maury Mann was that publisher who called me and said, "Hey, I hear you're the best insurance reporter out there. You want to write a book." Those kinds of things one can't predict
Yeah.
in their lives are going to happen, and how one book oddly leads to another one. So the fight for Fairfax, this history of Northern Virginia that I did, I wrote a biography of Maggie Bryant, who very wealthy woman who owned, I mean, just thousands of acres of Loudoun County, was Jackie Onassis's close friend. They were both equestrians. I wrote her biography. She was the only owner in the United States of a private toll road, and
Huh.
it's called the Dulles Greenway. When you go to the airport in Dulles Airport, there, that road she owned,
Okay.
and you paid a toll. And the building of that road was figured prominently in her
Huh.
biography. Frankly, it was the bulk of it.
Yeah.
That led me to knowing the guy who actually constructed the road, a fellow named Sid Dewberry. And then Sid said, you need to write a history of Northern Virginia because it's amazing. And I'm like, what? What's the history of Northern Virginia? But then he had contacts at George Mason University, and they liked the idea. They liked, so I mean, I don't know. That's how I'm going to continue living
Yeah.
my life. I don't know what's going to happen. Um, I have no interest in directing plays. I directed more than 40 plays professionally. It's hard.
Sure.
It's a person's game, and the late hours. I was able to do that, and I really wanted to do that, and did it well to the best of my abilities. I certainly have no interest in acting again, really. I'm just going to keep writing for the magazines I write for. I love the editors I work with there. I mean, I really do. This past week, with being evacuated because of the fires, how they all reached out to me with whatever we can do for you. Um, my book publishers, same thing. Of course, my friends, family. It's been a trying week.
Sure.
Looking back out there, see if the smoke's coming in again today. We have the Santa Anas coming in again today, so it is not over. It's
It's
only
not over.
45% contained. Yeah.
Well, before this is over today, and again, thank you so much, Russ, for doing this. I want to end on a segment called the One Word Challenge. So, what entails with the One Word Challenge is I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things, and
Yeah.
you have to do your best to say
Oh,
a word or two or sentence that comes to mind when you hear it. So, if you're ready, we'll start.
that's good.
Manhattan,
Brooklyn Bridge.
Halliburton.
It has to be one word, right?
Yeah, one word or two, whatever comes to mind. Writing.
This kind of writing or writing this writing?
Yeah, writing like a book or article.
Storytelling.
Success.
Nice to have. So there's hyphens.
Bill Murray,
Genius.
Ivan Reitman.
Genius.
And last but certainly never least in this cosmic universe we all call Earth, Russ Banham.
Hardworking.
Well, sir, I'd like to say again for the third and final time, thank you for taking the time out to speak with me today. It's a great treat and thrill to speak to someone like yourself who's got a story to tell.
Well, I hope it helps to inspire young people like yourself to never give up hope.
Yeah.
Honestly, you don't know what's around the corner. Um, the old cliche, when a door closes, a window opens, has been true in my life. Uh, when I told you earlier that I hit bottom, I did land on my back so I could look up and
There
call
you
my way
go.
out. So yeah, the pleasure's all mine, Nolan, really.
You talked about what you currently are working on that will coming out down the road at some point. In terms of what you're working on, or what you'll be working on, or any news about you, where can they find that information out?
I would say LinkedIn, to join LinkedIn and try to connect with me. Every article I write, when they come out in magazines first, and then maybe 10 days, 2 weeks later, they go online. All of those are sent to me. And so they're available on LinkedIn. You could read whatever articles I've written. Um, yeah, I got some good
Well,
ones too.
well, we'll see, and I'll be able to check that out as well. Well, as always, and as I said at the beginning, who the heck wouldn't enjoy this? Do us a favor by subscribing to YouTube, following the audio platforms, all that fun jazz. Follow us on Instagram at the Nolan Carr Night Show and Twitter at Nolan Carr Night. And the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean of Talk Shows, just like this one, I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Until next time, take care.